Okay, who has ever seen a baby deer right after it's been born? Or a video of it stumbling and walking? That might be me this morning. That's not a spiritual metaphor, that's just how I feel. No, it's a pleasure to be here. I am slowly weaning my way into speaking in church. The last time was the first time I'd done this, and it was with my dad, who's pretty good at this. And I'm alone today, but I'm very excited to be here. I really am, and I do feel like the Lord's given me something to say. I will make the same disclaimers I made last time. When I public speak, especially about Jesus, I tend to tear up, and I cannot talk when I tear up. So you may have some 15 to 30-second pauses. You're just going to have to bear with me. Good morning. Okay, the title of my message is actually Latin, Per aspera ad astra, which means through hardship to the stars. I'm going to start with a story. In the winter of 1914, a British explorer, actually there's a photo that I sent, I don't know if you guys got it in time. Yes, that photo was taken in 1914, even though it looks like an Instagram post from recently. In the winter of 1914, a British explorer named Ernest Shackleton set sail for Antarctica with 27 men. Their mission was audacious but simple: to become the first ever to cross the Antarctic continent on foot. They would claim this last great prize for the empire. Their ship bore a name that would prove prophetic, the Endurance. That's that ship right there. Just one day's sail from the edge of Antarctica, they got caught up in some ice. Not dramatically at first, it was just thick enough to stop their progress. Then it became thick enough to hold them still, and they were starting to get a little worried. They waited for 10 months for the ice to melt, for something to shift so they could break free. But for 10 more months, the ice tightened its grip until one night, with what they said sounded like a strike of thunder, the ice crushed the ship like a toy in a giant's fist. The men stood on the ice and watched their only way home disappear beneath the frozen sea. Now, many of us would have given up right there. If I'm in the middle of the Antarctic and my ship sinks to the bottom of the sea, and I've been there 10 months, I might dive in and heave ho and tell them good luck. These men were 1,000 miles from civilization, standing on a sheet now of floating ice in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean. Their ship was gone, their mission had failed, no one knew where they were, and no one was coming to save them. This is pre-cell phones. There was no distress signal going out. Shackleton, the leader of the expedition, understood something fundamental about survival. When your first plan fails, you make a second. When your second plan fails, you make a third. And you keep making plans until you run out of plans or you run out of life. For 5 more months, these men survived on a piece of drifting ice. They burned driftwood that they dried out, and then they burned whale blubber, which is flammable, but it smells terrible. It produces black smoke, and that's how they survived, eating whale blubber, burning whale blubber and eating penguins. When the ice broke apart beneath them after 5 months, it started to split, and then it did. They took to 3 small lifeboats they had saved from the ship in the most violent seas on Earth. They set sail, hoping to find land. When they finally reached something, it was a desolate island they called Elephant Island, again in the middle of the Arctic Sea. They'd been at sea for 497 days at this point. Now, this is where the story should end, but it doesn't. Shackleton looked at the impossible situation and made an impossible decision. He would take 5 of his 27 men in a boat about the size of this stage, 22 feet long, and sail 800 miles across the Drake Passage, which is the deadliest water on the planet, to a whaling station that he knew about on the far side of an island called South Georgia. Now, this is not South Georgia that you and I know. This one's much colder. It's basically a whaling island in the middle of the Arctic Sea. So let me be clear about what this meant. This is almost 500 days into the journey. This would be navigation basically by a prayer through hurricane seas in a boat the size of this stage across an ocean that routinely swallowed ships 10 times the size of this lifeboat. For 17 days they sailed. Waves the height of buildings crashed over them, and ice formed so thick on the boat they had to chip it off every hour to keep from sinking. That's how heavy it got. They made it to South Georgia, barely, but they made it. When they reached land, they realized they were on the wrong side of the island. They had to cross an unmapped mountain range on foot for 36 hours straight, no sleep, through glaciers and cliffs that had never been climbed to reach the whaling station on the other side of the island. They made it there too. And then, this is the part that matters, he went back. He chartered a ship at the whaling station. He sailed back 800 miles into those killing seas and rescued every single man he'd left behind on that rock. First cry. 27 men left, and 27 men came back. All right. Later, back on land, they recounted the experience, and Shackleton said, "When I look back at those days, I have no doubt that God guided us. Not only across those snowfields, but across the storm-white sea that separated Elephant Island from our landing place on South Georgia. I know that the long and racking march of 36 hours over the unnamed mountains and glaciers, it seemed to me often that we were 4, not 3. There were 3 men that crossed, and he said, it felt like 4 of us were there. He didn't mention it to anybody, but after returning to Elephant Island, his second in command mustered up the courage and said, "Boss, I had a curious feeling on the march. There was another person there with us." All right. If they can survive that, you can survive what you're going through. So, the question I want to answer this morning: how do we endure hardship? How do we endure trials in a way that is pleasing to God? So first, before we get into the how-to, whose idea was this anyway, right? Weren't we created in communion with God, right, in paradise? Where did this suffering stuff even come from? Turns out it was our idea. It's a symptom. Suffering and trials are a symptom of our separation from God. God put it lightly when he said in Eden after the fall. God said, "The very ground is cursed because of you. Getting food from the ground," this is the Message translation, "will be as painful as having babies is for your wife." He's talking to Adam. "You'll be working in pain all your life long. The ground will sprout thorns and weeds. You'll get your food the hard way, planting and tilling and harvesting, sweating in the fields from dawn to dusk until you return to that ground yourself, dead and buried. You started out as dirt, you'll end up as dirt." It's hopeful, isn't it? In Ecclesiastes, the wisest man who ever lived, Ecclesiastes 2:22 from the Message translation said, "What do you get for a lifetime of hard labor? Pain and grief from dawn to dusk." You get overlapping text, never a decent night's rest, and nothing but smoke. So God said it, Solomon said it, life apart from God is suffering. That is something we have to come to terms with. You know, Buddhism thinks you deal with it by going inward. Other religions think you deal with it by making sacrifices and praying to the God of your situation. But our life is a journey back to God. That's how we deal with suffering. And you know, there are benefits to our situation. Love that is forced on you isn't really love. And we get to choose. We were born into a world that was initially perfect, but we fell, and now love is a choice, and that is a blessing. Finding God in these moments of distress and of hardship is a blessing. So what is hardship? If all of life is suffering, what is a trial? What is hardship? Hardship or a trial is a spike of suffering above our baseline. How many runners do I have in the room? Don't be shy. I'm a runner. Shame on everybody else. You should be a runner. There's something in running called your Zone 2 training. There's a guy named Elliott Kipchoge. We almost share a name, but he's Kenyan, so it's Elliott with a D. That's all we share because this man ran a marathon in 2 hours. Now, if you're not a runner, you don't know how impressive that is maybe. You know, what's considered like a fast mile time is like 8 minutes. You know, you're a runner if you can run an 8-minute mile. If you can run a 6-minute mile, you're a pretty good runner. I'm jealous of you. I don't want to talk about our run times. Elliott Kipchoge ran a marathon, which is 26.2 miles at a 4-minute, 26-second pace for 26 miles. That is not impressive. That is inhuman. Okay, but when Elliott trains, he trains at zone 2 intensity. I'm hoping that the 425 pace is about zone 5, which is your max heart rate. I'm hoping that's his zone 5 intensity. But you can't train at that intensity or you'll burn out. So you train at what's called zone 2. Zone 2 is, for 30-ish old like myself, your heart rate is 130 to 145. And it's a boring pace. That's how it should feel. As you're running, you can have a conversation, you're not out of breath, and it feels boring. Elliott Kipchoge, who runs a 426 mile, trains at about a 9.5 minute mile pace. That's way, way slower, right? Now, there's this concept in medicine called your VO2 max. And you don't train your VO2 max by running at zone 2. You train your VO2 max by running at 426 pace, right, at zone 5. VO2 max is your body's ability to process the amount of oxygen that your heart, your lungs, your cardiovascular system can process in a single minute. And the only way to train your VO2 max, despite all your zone 2 training, your easy training, your long runs, the only way to train that is to spike your heart rate and max it out. You got to go all in. You're supposed to do it once or twice a week, but as a runner, you have to train both. Long, boring way of saying that's what hardship is. That's what a trial is. It's us going above and beyond, being faced with circumstances that are above and beyond our current baseline, our current ability to handle something. That is the only way we're ever going to achieve that level of growth. Did you know there's actually a verse in the Bible that guarantees us trials? John 16:33, Jesus himself. In this godless world, you will continue to experience difficulties. I'm on the last line of this. But take heart, I have conquered the world. Oh, there's actually one more verse. 1 Peter 4:12 says, friends, when life gets really difficult, don't jump to the conclusion that God isn't on the job. Instead, be glad you're in the very thick of what Christ experienced. This is a spiritual refining process with glory just around the corner. This is all the Message translation, by the way, if it sounds like I'm paraphrasing. They did, not me. There's another verse actually promising trials. Acts 14:22. After proclaiming the message and establishing a strong core of disciples, they retraced their steps, putting grit in the lives of the disciples, urging them to stick with what they'd begun to believe and not quit, making it clear to them that it wouldn't be easy. Anyone signing up for the kingdom of God has to go through plenty of hard times. Oh, and I can't forget 2 Timothy 3:13. Anyone who wants to live all out for Christ is in a bit of trouble. There's no getting around it. There's a lot of verses in the Bible promising trials, promising hardship. It is just part of the Christian walk. 2 Timothy, right there. Anyone who wants to live all out for Christ is in for a lot of trouble. It's not a maybe, it's a guarantee. We're walking with Jesus, hardship is coming. Tell you what, hardship's coming for everybody. It's just how do you want to handle it? You want to handle it on your own strength, or do you want to handle it with Jesus? I know which one I'm going to pick. Okay, when Dad asked me to speak, this was probably a month ago, I was really hoping I was going to be out of the season I was in so I could just give you a celebratory look back on how to handle it. Turns out I'm still right in the thick of it. I'll give you some backstory without boring you or losing you, hopefully. So for those of you that don't know, I started that company Link that facilitated the QR codes on the back of the chairs. I started that about 6 years ago with 2 of my buddies. Now, starting a company with 2 of your buddies sounds like it's going nowhere. You know, we held on to hope. We've been through a lot, and we're still around, baby. We started right before that little flu that spread across the earth, COVID-19. It killed our marketing plan, but we had just raised some money, so we survived that. And long story short, we have evolved a lot from that QR code, but still part of our product. And we're 6 years in. Point, right? The revenue's booming. We have 65 employees right now at the company. You need a lot of people to kind of grow the operation. So we hit the fundraising trail, and things start to get tense. Now, I continued the fundraising process, and I'm in the middle of some of the best conversations I've ever had as an entrepreneur. And I'm not choking up because I'm sad and I don't know what's going to happen. I do know what's going to happen. The Lord's going to come through. All that to say, the real question is not, will hardship come to me? The question is, come to you, come to me. The question is, will we endure it in a way that's pleasing to God? So, there's 3 pillars to doing this well. And I think David pretty well illustrates how to do it. David from the Bible, not my David. James 1, 2 through 4, Message translation, is a pretty annoying verse. Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. It's annoying. Did you know that most scholars agree when David was anointed as king by Samuel, he was about 15 years old. 15 to 17 is the range. From the time he knew he would be king at 15 years old to the verse in 2 Samuel when it says David perceived the Lord had established him king. That was 8 years into his reign. That was a 17-year period. From the time he knew he would be king till he ever got to be king. You know, Dad went very in-depth on the wilderness and 38 trillion gallons of water. For 40 years, those people had to keep perspective. Moses had to keep perspective about what was going on. Let's talk about David. The first pillar of how to do this well is to keep perspective. For those of you that are taking notes, this is an alliterative sermon. The first P is perspective. David's brutally honest in the Psalms about how painful it is right now. You don't have to read most of the Psalms, this has been a very spiritually formative season for me. I've been reading more and more in the Bible than I ever have. The Psalms are a little bit depressing. Like most of them are kind of sad. We cherry pick the good ones, but a lot of them are like, woe is me, right? Psalm 35, David says, for his anger is but for a moment and his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. That one was pretty well balanced. Psalm 13, 1 through 2 and 5 through 6, he says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Will you hide your face from me forever? But then he forces his perspective to shift and he says, but I've trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. He preaches to his own soul. Right? And we're going to see that again. So how do you maintain that kind of perspective on your problems for a year, for 10 months in my case? Feels like a lifetime. Some of y'all are laughing at me because this ain't even a real thing yet, but it's been a hard year. How do you do it over 17 years like David had to? How do you do it over 40 years like the Israelites had to? Brings me to my second pillar, presence. So for years, let's talk about another time in David's life where the presence of God was all that got him through the season. For years, David and his 600 men were fugitives on the run from Saul and Saul's army. They were living in caves, they were hiding in forests, constantly on the run. Their families, if you think about it, it wasn't just 600 men, they had to drag their families along for this ride. Ziklag, how many of you have heard my dad talk about Ziklag? This is probably the verse he throws back at me the most when I call him complaining about this stuff. So Ziklag, I did not know all the context, but I'll try to break it down for you best I can. David was so tired of running at this point that he made a deal with the devil, not actually, but King Achish, the Philistine king. And he said, look, I need refuge. Is there anything you can do for me? And this Philistine king was like, sure, I can give you this neutral territory called Ziklag, but you're going to have to fight for me and my army. So David literally was so tired of being on the run, so tired of not having a place of refuge for his family, for his men's families, that he took up a deal with the enemy and agreed to fight, if it came to it, against his own armies of Israel to have some refuge. That's what Ziklag was. So a little while in, they were called up to fight against Israel. King Achish was like, time to shine. So David and his men were called up. When they got to the battlefield, thank God, all the other Philistine kings were like, what is David doing on our battlefield? They're like, this guy's going to turn on us in the middle of the battle. Ain't no way he's fighting the Israelites with us. This is a trap. And they sent him back to Ziklag in anger. Well, when he gets back, everything in Ziklag had been raided. Their wives were taken, their children were taken, their stuff was taken, and it was burning in ash. They didn't know if everybody was dead. They didn't know where they'd gone. They didn't know who did it. They came back, though, and it was tough. 1 Samuel 30:1-6. It says, they found Ziklag burned with fire, their wives and sons and their daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David was stressed, as you can imagine. The people spoke of stoning him. His men talked about stoning him because all the people were bitter in soul. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So just picture this. They get back. They've been on the run for all this time. They finally have refuge. They muster up the courage to go fight their own brothers, right? Go fight the army that they just came from. They get turned away. They get sent back. And now everything they have has been taken from them and is gone. Talk about an emotional roller coaster. Saul was his enemy. David at this point, Saul is his enemy. The Philistines are his enemy. The Israelites are his enemy. And his men are his enemy, right? The guy chasing him forever still wants to kill him. The Philistines, who he's aligned himself with, are still his enemy. The Israelites know what he's done at this point. They know that he's taken up refuge with the Philistines. They're his enemy, and now his own men are saying it's time to kill him. Now this dude, that's the lowest of the low. It's got to be for David. Right? The mistakes he made later, he was at least established as king. He at least knew what he had at stake. At this point, he has nothing. Everything that he had vaporized like smoke. The people spoke of stoning him. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. But it says David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. All he had at that moment was presence. All he had was the relationship he'd built in the fields, as a shepherd boy. All he had. He didn't have his men. He didn't have his wives. He didn't even have one wife. All of his wives, it said, were taken away too. He asked one of the prophets, should we pursue these guys or not? Pursue these guys who took our people or not? And he said, yes, everything will be given back to you. And sure enough, he mustered up the strength. He strengthened himself in the Lord. He and his men pursued the Amalekites, and they got every last thing back. Every woman, every child, every son, and all the goods, it says they got back. He did that over and over and again throughout his life. For 17 years, he endured hardships like this one. So he kept perspective. He stayed in the presence, and perspective and presence plus time equals the third P, perseverance. That's a zinger. Perspective and presence plus time equals perseverance. Y'all can have that one for free. Romans 5:3-5 says, trouble can develop passionate patience within us. That patience forges the tempered steel of virtue. That's in about the middle of the screen. That patience forges the tempered steel of virtue. David did not take shortcuts even when he could have. Remember, he had to do this for 17 years, and the situation I just described was one of a million that he found himself in. Y'all know the story probably. Saul was kind of the crux of all of David's problems, this jealous king that wanted to kill him. And at one point, David literally had Saul cornered in a cave. Could have axed him right there. David was a great warrior. Could have killed him, shortcut his way to the throne, been king at probably 20 years old at that point, and reigned 50 years instead of 33. But he didn't. He cut off a piece of Saul's robe because he trusted in the Lord's timing more than his own. He cut off a piece of his robe, and he's like, I could have done it. Could have killed you, but I didn't do it because he trusted the timing of the Lord. Psalm 27:13-14 sums up David's attitude throughout all of this. He says, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. and take heart and wait for the Lord. Told you I was preaching to myself. Sorry. So, we do all that, right? We maintain perspective. We stay in the presence. We persevere. I just want to say, how many of y'all are in a trial right now? All right. Cool. So you know how it feels. It's a different one than mine. Mine's different than yours, but you know how it feels. And unfortunately, it's kind of the best way to grow closer to God. You're not gonna grow closer to God in this way, sitting on the beach with all your problems solved, all the money in the world, everything fixed, everybody healthy. That's a good feeling, and it might make you appreciate all that God's done for you, but it's not gonna bring you closer to him in this visceral way that going through problems will. And so I'm sorry that we have to go through it, but we do. As terrible as this experience has been in a lot of ways, I look back on the leader, let's just talk worldly stuff. The leader I was, the CEO I was 10 months ago is a very different guy from who I am today. And I would have preferred, who's seen The Matrix? I would have preferred just to get the download of everything that I've learned. That is not real life. We have to go through it. We have to go through the jujitsu training and the helicopter pilot training to be able to do that stuff. We can't just get a download, unfortunately. And so, in my experience, the perseverance can only come with time. That's got to cook in the oven. But the stuff you can do now is shift your perspective, encourage yourself in the Lord, and get into his presence. Just do that. I'm ashamed to say, but it wasn't until the last year that I got into a daily quiet time ritual. I would do stuff here and there, but it wasn't I will religiously exercise. Do not get in between me and my run or the gym. I will be a meaner person than I am right now. But my quiet time was kind of if I get around to it, I will. And now that's flipped, because there's something about that you can't articulate to someone who isn't doing it, but when you are doing it, you just know. There's something so formative and so nourishing about doing that. And I'm reading this book right now, The Divine Conspiracy by a guy, Dallas Willard. If you haven't read his stuff, really smart Christian kind of philosopher figure. And he talks about spiritual formation in this interesting way. Spiritual formation is not like studying for an exam or studying for a degree. You can check all those boxes and kind of do it yourself. Yes, you have the help of your peers and your teachers, your professors to get there, but you can pretty well control whether or not you're going to get a certification or a degree or pass a test, right? Spiritual formation is not that way. I can't read all the right verses and sing the right songs and go to church on the right cadence to become spiritually mature. It is a collaboration between you and God. And sometimes just showing up and not reading anything or singing anything, just showing up and saying, God, I'm available, will be enough for him to fulfill his end of the bargain and work on you in that way. Spiritual formation is a partnership. It's not an effort-based thing, but you have to show up. And God's going to honor that. He's going to honor you setting aside time and dedicating time for him, whether it looks like, Peter's practice might have, or Elliott before work stressed about a meeting, right? He's going to meet you there. What's all this for? James 1, the same passage that says, trials are awesome, a few verses down, he says, anyone who meets a testing challenge head on and manages to stick it out is mighty fortunate. That person will receive the victor's crown of life. So for Shackleton, for our guy in the Arctic Sea, it wasn't even that he crossed the Arctic on foot, he didn't. But he and all those men said the rest of their life was comparatively really easy because of what they went through. Their perspective was forever changed. The surgeon on the trip, I forget his name, he said he watched Shackleton before they set out on the lifeboats throw his gold watch, his gold cigarette case, and his gold plated notebook into the ocean just because he didn't need the weight on that trip. And the surgeon said that for him changed his perspective. He said, when gold becomes a liability to a man, that's how you know you've achieved perspective on life, right? So, hardship's coming. You know, some of you are in it right now. But the only way out is through. The only way to get where you want to go is through. And the only way that you're going to have the kind of relationship with God that he wants you to have is to go through the muck and the mire. So I love you. Thank you for listening. That's the end of my sermon. I appreciate it.